Billionaire pushes black maid into a pool. Minutes later, he fell to his knees when he heard, "Shut your mouth, you black woman." The words tore through the garden air like the crack of a whip, sharp enough that the jazz band faltered mid-phrase. Grant Mercer, roughly 43 years old, white, wealthy, powerful, and accustomed to a life where no one ever contradicted him, stood beneath the bright garden lights in a blinding white linen suit. He stared down at the black woman nearly 2 decades younger than he was, Elena Cruz, who held a silver tray in her hands. All she had done was speak a small sentence. It had not been her fault. But in Grant Mercer's world, truth spoken by a servant was always treated as an insult. And now Elena stood at the very edge of the long pool, stretching across the garden, the pool Mercer liked to call his pride. It was a saltwater basin built far deeper than any ordinary design, meant to mimic a South American habitat, filled with fish no one should legally possess. People called it an ornamental tank. He called it his piranha pool. The guests standing around the water fell silent. Some held their breath. A few lifted their phones, hands trembling slightly while their eyes glimmered with a cruel curiosity. No one spoke. No one stepped forward. In the Mercer estate, everyone understood that the line between courage and foolishness was no wider than a single breath. Grant took a step. Elena stepped back. It became a strange dance. He advanced. She retreated. With every small backward step, her heel brushed closer to the cold stone edge behind her. One more step would mean nothing but open air. Under the golden lights, the dark green surface of the water looked like the waiting mouth of a pit. She tried to steady herself, but her voice still trembled. "Mr. Mercer, I did not mean disrespect. I only ask that you not speak so harshly to Miss Ruth. She has been working here longer than I have, and she is elderly." A few murmurs drifted through the crowd. One pair of sympathetic eyes, a slight shake of a head. No one dared intervene. They stood as if waiting for the climactic moment of a cruel play. Grant laughed, asking me, "You think you have the right to ask for anything here?" He tilted his head, his mouth curling into a cold smile. "Who do you think you are?" He stepped close enough that Elena felt his breath touch her skin. "Stop pretending to be brave. Ask me louder. Let everyone hear." Elena felt her chest tighten. Behind her, Miss Ruth lifted a desperate hand, but a guest held her back. Elena met the older woman's eyes, then looked around. No one would save her. She had known that from the moment she accepted this job. This place was not built for truth or mercy. It was built for money and fear. She drew in a breath. Her dark eyes caught the shimmer of the water. "Please do not do this to her. I beg you." This time the plea carried no tremor. It carried something else, a surrender, a decision. Grant frowned, as if he had heard something strange in her voice. A flicker of confusion passed through his gaze. Then he tightened his grip on her arm. Elena gasped. She twisted, trying to wrench free, but he was far stronger. Her uniform scraped the slick, cold stone. Several champagne glasses shattered on the ground when she struck the edge of a table. The air around them seemed to tighten. Pushing her away, Grant spoke with a low voice. "So you remember who has power here?" Elena whispered. "Do not, please." But he had already pushed. A scream rose, a slip, a single suspended second. Then water cold as a blade wrapped around her body. The night above broke into 100 scattered lights. Air fled her lungs. The shouts above softened in the salted water. Elena sank. Her hair drifted like strands of seaweed. Every movement slowed. And in the stillness at the bottom, old memories rose like a dark tide pulled from the years of pain. A warm voice, scientific notes smelling of salt, hands that always trembled after deep dives. Carlos Vega, marine biologist, the man who had been her husband. the man who had died because of Mercer Industries. Elena opened her eyes underwater, watched the shadows of fish sliding past, then looked at the faint patches of light above. She did not scream, did not flail, did not fear, because she had prepared for this moment. She knew what Mercer kept hidden beneath the granite and glamour, and she knew she would survive. At any cost, because she was not merely a servant. She was the wife of the man destroyed by Mercer's hand. She was the witness, the keeper of memory, the woman standing on the edge between death and truth. And tonight was only the beginning. A beginning Grant Mercer would never foresee. Water never forgets, and neither does Elena. Before we continue following the turbulent and powerful journey of Elena, if you feel this story has touched something within your heart, we invite you to subscribe to the Emotional Echoes channel, like this video, and share it with someone you believe needs to hear it too. Every time you share, you create another chance for us to tell more meaningful, soul-stirring stories each day. Where are you listening from? Let us know in the comments by naming your city or country so we can see just how far Elena's story is reaching. Thank you for being with us. Now, let us step into part 2 of the story. Elena remained motionless beneath the icy water, her body suspended as if held in mid-air. Her long hair drifted in the salty current like a wisp of black smoke. Sounds from the shore were now only faint echoes, muffled by the rippling surface above her head. Everything slowed down, as though time itself had been trapped with her in that moment. Her eyes were wide open, not panicked, but unnervingly alert. Elena did not struggle. She exhaled slowly, letting bubbles escape her mouth, rising and bursting like unsaid memories. In that silent void, her mind unfolded, pulling her back to the years before it all began. She remembered clearly the day Carlos first spoke about Mercer Industries. They were sitting on the back steps of their house, his hands still carrying the scent of the sea. Carlos Vega, a marine biologist from Puerto Rico, 8 years older than Elena, with quiet but resolute eyes, had spent nearly 10 years studying the coastal ecosystems of Santa Loren Bay. One autumn evening, Carlos held a stack of documents printed with charts and photographs of coral reefs bleaching and changing color. He said something was wrong. Sea levels were fluctuating unnaturally. The pH was rising, coral was dying at rates that could not be explained naturally, and his former employer, Grant Mercer, was funding a project called Deep Sea Revival, but no one was allowed to see the data. Only Mercer had access. At the time, Elena did not fully understand, but she knew her husband's eyes. When Carlos put on his glasses and said he would not stay silent, it was no longer just work. It was a belief, a mission. She remembered how he paused, staring at her for a long moment before whispering, "If I disappear, do not believe anyone who calls it an accident." 3 months later, the so-called accident happened. Carlos's small laboratory mysteriously exploded. All records, equipment, water samples and computers were incinerated. When the police arrived, they claimed it was an electrical fault. No further investigation, no evidence preserved, no explanation. Elena lost her husband, her home, and her faith in justice. But what she did not lose was memory. She began collecting fragments, surviving manuscripts, emails Carlos had sent to fellow researchers, a notebook he had hidden beneath the car seat. Then she discovered something. Grant Mercer was not only destroying the coral reefs, he was testing a new chemical, which Carlos had called Phase 1 biological toxin, a substance discharged through underground pipes leading directly from the lab into the ocean. No one believed Elena. No one stood with a poor Latin widow who had once been a servant, until she discovered that the Mercer household was hiring internally. She saw an opportunity. She applied under a different name and waited. 3 months later, she was accepted. Under the name Elena Morales, she became a servant in the Mercer mansion. 3 years of working, enduring, and remaining silent. 3 years of observing, recording, mapping every camera, every secret door, every device controlling the water in that luxurious stone garden. And now, as her body sank slowly to the bottom of the pool, there was no fear within her, only the quiet certainty of determination. She let her hand brush lightly against the rough, cold sand. The fish swirled around her but did not bite. They had not been fed before the party, as Mercer had once joked to his guests, a twisted kind of humor. She spotted a small camera hidden beneath an artificial coral rock. Just as she had suspected, everything was recorded. Everything. Elena began to push off with her feet, gently rising. The first rays of light pierced the water, striking her face. She did not need to scream. She did not need anyone's help. She only needed to breathe. And as she broke the surface, her eyes met Mercer's. While the others were still in a state of panic, he stood frozen, face stiff, and for the first time, fear. Elena knew from this moment forward he would never hold control again. And the past that Mercer had believed buried beneath the water had returned, silent but unforgettable. Elena stepped from the water in a heavy, almost stony silence. The ball gowns recoiled, whispers and the clinking of spilled wine filling the polished stone floor. Mercer said nothing. He stood there, lips pressed tight, eyes fixed on the woman who had just emerged from the very pool he had once used to threaten others. Elena did not glance at him again. She strode directly into the house, her soaked uniform leaving dark trails across the gleaming wood floors. She knew every corner of the mansion, every door, every hidden passage, and she knew time was short. While Mercer was still flustered between managing his guests and trying to retrieve any video that might have been recorded, she had to act. The control room was in the basement, behind an unlocked iron door just beyond the main kitchen. It was a room she had spent hours cleaning each week, but this time she entered not with a rag in hand, but with a single objective. The small, enclosed space was filled with servers and surveillance screens. The dim lights reflected off her chilled, wet face. Elena pulled a robe from the hook, draping it over herself to avoid leaving water traces. She knew the system backed up every 30 minutes, and the main drive was stored in an internal hard drive located directly beneath the primary surveillance monitor. She bent down, opened the panel, and carefully removed the drive, replacing it with a pre-prepared copy from her pocket. The old drive, now containing the video of her being pushed into the water, was securely hidden in a waterproof fabric pouch. She did not need to copy all the data, only the footage from the 3 main cameras around the pool, along with the water flow map controlled by the pool's underground filtration system. She had studied it for months and knew exactly where Mercer had concealed the experimental water pump systems, the very thing her husband had warned about, the thing that had killed an entire section of coral 6 years ago. The screens lit up as she logged in using a temporary code Travis Yates had once given her before he had been fired for questioning a distorted water sample. Travis, the only engineer on the team brave enough to challenge them, and the first person Elena had sought out after taking the job. Together, they had planned in the shadows. Every time she cleaned the system, she memorized the data. She had learned to read the flow maps, interpret water temperature readings, and identify chemical traces in electronic logs. And now, it would take only a few more minutes. Elena quickly copied the data onto a second USB drive, checking it twice. She erased all traces of her login, unplugged the cables, and secured the device in her waterproof bag before slipping back out. No sound, no alarm, only the steady, heavy rhythm of her own breath. As she closed the door, she heard footsteps in the corridor above. Someone was looking for her. Perhaps Linda May, the older chef who had silently witnessed everything, perhaps one of the security managers. She was not sure, but she knew the only thing that mattered now was escaping the basement without arousing suspicion. Elena turned into the laundry room, slid down the narrow hallway that led to the back parking area. A small door opened to the staff area. She removed her robe and changed into the dry uniform she had stashed in the locker. Her hair was tied up, her face dried, her eyes calm. Once more, she stepped out as if she had never fallen into the pool, never stolen data right under Mercer's nose. Outside, darkness had fully fallen. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and the slight chill of early summer. Elena placed the fabric pouch in the basket of her old bicycle and pedaled away from the mansion in silence. Lights from the party still glimmered behind her, music drifting as though nothing had happened. But Elena knew that within a few hours something crucial would change. The first piece of evidence had been taken, and this time no fire could destroy the truth. No one would be allowed to bury what the water was trying to return. The coastal road was deserted as Elena rode toward the small rented room near the old port. The bicycle creaked softly, wheels rolling over uneven pavement, each pedal stroke pushing her further from Mercer's artificial lights and closer to memories long buried. The night in Santa Loren Bay carried the sense of salt and metal, familiar smells that Carlos had loved. He had always told her that the sea was not just a workplace, but a language. An ancient, quiet, yet persistent language, and those patient enough to listen would understand the truths that humans tried to hide. Elena parked the bike and stepped into the tiny room, just large enough for a bed, a desk, and an old wooden cabinet. She locked the door, drew the curtains, and removed the fabric pouch from the basket, placing it gently on the desk as if it contained a piece of her own body. From the bottom drawer, she pulled out a small, old wooden box, worn with age, the lid inscribed in Carlos's handwriting, "Para que el mar nunca olvide," so that the sea never forgets. Every time she touched the box, she could hear his voice, quiet, steady, and patient, just as he had read his notes into an old recorder he carried on every dive. Elena opened the box. Inside lay a thin leather notebook, a few yellowed papers, and an old audio tape that had been transferred to a USB. She opened her laptop, plugged in the device, and pressed play. Carlos's voice came through after a few seconds of static. September 11th. Water temperature rising unusually compared to data from 3 years earlier. Coral changing color, sediment layers altered, likely due to chemical impact from the underground system. The suspected site lay beneath the land where Mercer Industries was constructing a marine biology center. If the next data matched, this was no environmental accident, but controlled waste discharge. Call it Phase 1. Elena sat motionless. She had listened to this recording dozens of times, memorizing every word, yet each play tightened her chest as though someone had squeezed it. For less than 2 weeks after the final recording, Carlos had died. At the time, she did not believe it. No one did. But no one dared question the region's largest corporation, especially when the police claimed it was a laboratory error. All she had left were fragments like this, and 3 years of silence. She opened the notebook. Carlos's handwriting was straight, precise, almost printed. One page was marked with a fraying red thread. A short note, enough to leave her staring for a long time. "If I do not return, look for the drain behind the fish pool. There flows water I trust will lead to the answer." He trusted she would know when to go down. Elena closed the notebook, hand trembling slightly. She had once thought it a metaphorical final wish. But now, after what had just happened, she understood Carlos was referring to the underground discharge system beneath Mercer's fish pool. And if correct, that flow could be the key to all the evidence they had never been able to find. She opened the system map she had taken from the mansion. The conduits were encoded with technical symbols, but Elena had learned to read them. She traced drain number 8, the one marked in the note. It led to an area designated for experimental biological filtration. That meant Carlos had been right. Mercer was not just keeping ornamental fish. He was testing a method of direct waste discharge into the seabed, and if the system remained active, all unusual changes in seawater could be detected through chemical analysis. But she could not do this alone. She needed someone who understood the system from the inside, someone who had once stood up to Mercer and been cast out like trash. Only one name came to mind: Travis Yates. Elena stood, donned her coat, tucked the hard drive into her bag, and turned back to glance at the wooden box one last time before turning off the light. The sea never forgets. And now, it was humanity's turn to remember. The sky was still dark when Elena arrived at the small wooden house perched at the edge of the eastern harbor. She parked her bike outside and stepped onto the old wooden steps, which creaked under her weight. There was no doorbell. She knocked 3 times, short, then long, as they had agreed 3 years before. No answer. She knocked again, slower, more deliberately. After a moment, the door cracked open. A man stood behind the curtain, squinting under the pale yellow light inside. His hair was streaked with grey, his beard unshaven, his deep-set eyes those of someone who had lived too long in silence. Travis Yates did not speak, but his gaze recognized her instantly. Elena nodded, her voice quiet but firm. "I need you." Travis widened the door, stepping back to let her in. The house smelled of old machine oil, technical books, and a hint of sea dampness drifting through the window. A wooden table in the center of the room was cluttered with circuits, boards, and a few disassembled devices. On the wall hung a crooked map of the Mercer complex, still pinned with faded red notes. Travis poured her a glass of water, remaining silent until she pulled the hard drive from her bag. He sat, took it, flipped it over, and nodded slightly. Still the old code. They had not changed the system. Elena sat across from him, eyes fixed on his. I got into the surveillance room. I took the camera footage around the pool and the water flow data beneath the fish tank. "I need you to verify what I think is true." Travis booted up the computer, connected the drive, typed a few commands, and straightened in his seat. The screens flickered to life with security footage. He rewound the video. Grant Mercer pushing Elena into the water appeared clear, undeniable. Travis paused for a few seconds, then switched to the flow map. His eyes narrowed. "This is the underground discharge system. It runs deep into the seabed, connecting to the testing chamber. They called it a biological circulation system, but I know what it is. This is where Carlos first discovered the violations. This is why he was removed from the project." Elena looked at Travis, her voice dropping. "Do you have any proof? Anything you kept?" Travis gave a faint, almost grim smile. He stood, walked into the inner room, and returned with a locked metal box. Opening it, he retrieved a stack of old papers, several water samples marked in blue ink, and a short video recorded on a handheld camera. "This is what I kept before I was dismissed, but then I had no one beside me. Now, if you have that video, we can force him to answer." Elena opened Carlos's notebook, pointing to the symbol he had marked. "Drain number 8. He knows it." Travis nodded. "I've checked that area, but I never had access to the deepest underground level. Only Mercer and 2 chief engineers are authorized. But if there's a way in from the fish pool side, we could approach it from outside. Risky, but doable." Elena sat in silence for a moment, thinking of Carlos's eyes the last time they met. He never said goodbye, only told her to listen to the sea. "Let it guide you." She lifted her gaze to Travis. "I'll go back there, but this time, I'm not going alone." Travis did not answer immediately. He poured more water, took a important sip, then nodded. "Then we start with the technical map. I'll teach you to read it like an engineer, not a servant. Because if we want to face Mercer, we must speak his language. Not to obey, but to expose him." Outside, the sea wind blew stronger. In the cramped space, two people, both abandoned by the same system, now sat facing each other, turning over every page of memory and evidence, as if mending a torn net. A net that could pull the truth from the depths to the surface, and this time they would not let silence win. 3 days later, Elena and Travis stood before the security fence at the back of Mercer Industries' old technical complex, once a marine laboratory, before being sealed and converted into an equipment storage area. There were no cameras, or rather, any cameras that had once been installed had been removed after the research facility was dismantled following Carlos's death. Travis gave a hand signal. Now, she nodded and, together with him, slipped through the pre-cut opening in the fence, carefully stepping between low, overgrown bushes. They did not speak. There was no need. Silence was a language they both understood, honed from years of pressure and loss. It reminded them they were on the right path, and that everything could collapse in an instant. Travis led her to a small recess beneath the cracked concrete floor, where a manhole cover was buried under soil and roots. He bent down, prying the cover with a crowbar. Metal screeched. A damp, chemical-tinged air escaped, familiar to anyone who had ever worked near a saltwater lab. Elena covered her nose, eyes scanning as she followed him down the narrow iron steps. Travis's flashlight swept across enormous pipes running along the ceiling, walls mottled with green mold. White-painted numbers and technical symbols were peeling. But the most important marking remained. Drain number 8. Beneath it lay the place Carlos had mentioned in his notebook and what Elena believed held. Undeniable evidence. They pressed deeper into the narrow corridor, water forming shallow puddles beneath their feet. At a turn, Travis stopped, gesturing for her to halt. Ahead was a small control room, its glass half broken, the console dimly lit. He typed a few commands on the old screen, then stepped back. A schematic appeared, mapping the flow system. Red arrows traced the path from the artificial fish pond to the underground discharge system, which led nearly 2 miles out to sea. Travis lightly tapped the flow rate display. Something was off. Flow increased abnormally at night, but decreased whenever staff were present, as if someone was exploiting gaps in monitoring to discharge. Elena stared at the data. These numbers were not errors. They were evidence of a deliberately designed pattern. Mercer was not just hiding. He had built an entire system to conceal it. She turned to Travis. "Is there a way to record the entire flow in real time?" He nodded, pulling a small device from his backpack, a temporary flow data logger. It would record all parameters for 48 hours. We have to install it in the main conduit beneath the pond. If the readings match the map Carlos left, we will know exactly what is being discharged and when. Elena nodded, eyes fixed on the schematic. On that map, the currents were more than engineering diagrams. They were the path of truth, and truth, however buried, always finds a way back. They left the control room, continuing down the corridor toward the side exit. Stepping into the dim outdoor light, Travis spoke softly. "Are you sure you're ready for what comes next?" Elena paused for a moment, looking up at the overcast sky. She felt the cold, salty breeze brush her face. "I've lived with these questions for too long. It's time to answer them, one by one. And if that means reaching the very depths of Mercer Industries, then I will." Travis nodded. He said nothing more, but the look in his eyes was no longer that of someone who had been defeated. It was the gaze of someone who had just seen the path forward. And beneath the dark earth, the water continued to flow, quietly but persistently. A reminder that no matter how long the truth is buried, it will eventually rise. And when it does, no one can turn away. The next day, as Travis processed the flow data at home, Elena returned to her familiar role. A silent, humble servant, knowing when to bow and when to leave a room without leaving a trace. But today, she was not entering the Mercer house to clean or serve tea. She had returned to observe someone Carlos had once mentioned in a brief note, someone who had only now reappeared in this dark, unfolding picture. Vin Reardon, the man in the grey suit. Vin arrived at the Mercer mansion in the afternoon, unannounced, without an escort. He stepped from a silver car, carrying a neat, worn leather briefcase. He bypassed the main entrance, heading straight to the rear garden where Grant Mercer sat under the ancient olive tree, slightly hunched, face tense. Elena, tray in hand, moved slowly through the doorway to the garden, close enough to watch without drawing attention. Vin sat across from Grant, setting the briefcase on the table and opening it. For a few fleeting seconds, before the lid hid its contents, Elena saw a thick stack of documents, the top corner stamped with red italic letters, Internal Risk Assessment. Vin was not a stranger. During the final 2 years of Carlos's tenure at Mercer Industries, he had been the head of the internal legal department, with access to sensitive reports and concealed internal investigations. But what caught Elena's attention was not his title, it was his silence after Carlos's death. Vin had said nothing, appeared in no reports, as if he had never existed. And now he had returned, just as the undercurrents began to rise. Vin's deep voice broke the quiet, words unclear at first, but Elena caught a fragment. Leaked data. Then another word. Coral reef. She froze, fingers tightening slightly around the silver tray. Grant sat still, face darkening, then leaned toward Vin, saying something that made him frown. After a while, Vin closed the briefcase, stood, neither shaking hands nor greeting anyone. He departed through a side exit, leaving Grant alone, his gaze drifting outward as if seeing something cracking beneath him that he could no longer control. That evening, Elena followed Vin from the Mercer house, trailing him to a small bar beside the harbour, once a meeting place for retired lawyers and investigators. He sat alone at the counter, ordering a whiskey neat, placing the briefcase beside him. Elena entered minutes later, taking a seat 3 stools away, ordering the same drink. They did not look at each other at first, but Vin broke the silence. "The girl who survived the piranha pool, right?" Elena turned calmly. And he was the one who knew Carlos Vega had been dismissed, but chose to remain silent. Vin was not. Surprised. He studied her for a long moment, then exhaled, his voice steady and worn like the coat he wore. "You do not understand all that I had to remain silent for. But I am not here to protect Grant anymore. You have a piece of it, but not enough. If you want the whole story, you will need the full, unaltered video from the old surveillance system that only I still control." Elena took a first sip and set her glass down. "I need proof. You need what from me?" Vin pulled a small piece of paper from his pocket, sliding it to her without touching her hand. "I need a missing piece. A copy of the research documents Carlos sent out before he died. I believe you have it." Elena looked at the paper, then back at him. Does he want justice, or merely survival? Vin did not answer immediately, but his eyes shone with something very real. "I only want one thing properly recorded as it happened. You give me the copy. I provide the video. After that, what you do with it is your choice." They sat in silence, the yellow light casting shadows on 2 figures, one who had been silent too long, the other carrying truth too heavy. And in that moment, something shifted quietly, like an underground current, slow but unstoppable. Elena nodded. An agreement was formed. No papers, no handshake, just the understanding between 2 people who had stood at the margins of a system that did not allow truth to exist. And this time, they chose not to remain silent. They left the bar under the darkened sky, stepping onto the empty street where lamplight spilled golden across the gravel-strewn asphalt. The sea wind swept through narrow alleys, carrying a briny tang and the distant clang of steel cranes at the harbour. Vin Reardon remained silent for a moment, clutching his leather briefcase, moving deliberately as if retracing the final steps of a memorandum long folded away in memory. Elena walked beside him, eyes never leaving his steps. She knew this man was not entirely villain, yet had never dared to be fully good. He existed along the edge of law and pragmatism, of what should be done and what must be done. And now he was choosing to step out of the shadows, but on his own terms. They stopped at the end of an old pier, where a wooden bench had rotted halfway through, overlooking the dark, distant waters. Vin set the briefcase down, sat on the bench, and rubbed his temple, looking at Elena as though he were speaking to a younger version of himself. You know, Carlos was the last person in this company to ask the questions everyone should have asked, and he paid the price for it. When I was assigned to review the biological revival project 3 years ago, I discovered overlapping reports, a lack of transparency, and test discharges that were not part of the original approval. But Mercer ordered the entire investigation shut down. I was instructed to stay silent, and I did. Because I had a family, contractual obligations, a reputation to protect. Elena sat beside him, eyes fixed on the water. And now you want to atone with the video. I want to return the truth to the person worthy of holding it, he replied, his voice deepening. But I also need to protect what Carlos sent out. Those documents, if released unchecked, would trigger a chain reaction. Parties involved would deny, cover up, destroy evidence faster than the press could access it. I want it delivered to the right person at the right time. Elena retrieved a brown envelope from her coat containing the final copy of Carlos's research documents. She had kept it like a relic. But now she knew it was time to use it to open the door Carlos had been knocking on with no one listening. She placed the envelope in Vin's hands. If you lie, I will find out. He nodded, expression unchanged. And if I keep my word, you will have the full, unaltered video directly from the original surveillance system. You can use it any way you wish. They said nothing more. They simply sat side by side, as if guarding the last secret about to be revealed. The wind rose stronger, scattering a few papers from the briefcase. Vin bent to retrieve them without a word of thanks. He was old, shoulders slightly stooped, yet still bore the resolute air of a man who had handled far too many matters that needed to be buried. When he stood, he looked at Elena one last time. Could she survive this? She did not answer. She only met his gaze, fear gone, replaced by resolve. I have no other choice. He nodded and left silently, leaving Elena alone on the pier in the night. The envelope had been delivered. The price had been set. 3 hours later, when Elena returned to her small rented room, a message appeared on her computer. No text, only a video file attached. She opened it. The images were clear, uncut, unblurred. From a high-angle view, Grant Mercer appeared in every action, every step, every word as he pushed her into the pool. And more importantly, the video captured the flow control system beneath the fish pond, including audio leaked from the internal communication system. A technician's voice was clear. Push the third test batch. Prepare discharge in 10 minutes. That was the evidence. Undeniable. Elena sat silently in the dark. The video ended. The screen went black. But she knew. What she had just received was more than justice. It was the beginning of a collapse. And no one, not even Grant Mercer, could stop it from happening. The next morning, grey-gold sunlight filtered through the dusty windows of the small wooden house where Travis lived, falling over the cluttered work table covered in technical schematics, water analysis samples, and yellowed notes. Elena sat beside him, her eyes red yet clear after a night with almost no sleep. She had watched the video at least 10 times, rewinding each frame, marking timestamps, comparing every camera angle with the layout of the fish pond and the underground system. every detail aligned with the sketches Carlos had left in his notebook. Each time she replayed it, she felt as if she could hear her husband's voice whispering from beneath the water. He had told the truth, and now that truth had begun to rise. Travis set a hot cup of coffee before her, then pulled out an older blueprint, beside which lay a handwritten note in blue ink. This is the archive layout for Mercer Industries, an old file from when the company still kept its headquarters at the coastal research site. He pointed to a marked area, labeled with the initials LMA, likely standing for Secure Code Archive. His voice lowered. This is the attic. It once held technical files that were never digitized. Most were moved, but Linda told me some files were too sensitive and Mercer refused to have them transferred. Elena lifted her head. Linda May, the former cook, the silver-haired woman who had seen her being pushed into the pool, yet remained silent like everyone else. But Elena knew Linda's eyes that night were different from those that had turned away. They were the eyes of someone who had endured much and knew how to wait for the right moment to speak. That afternoon, Elena and Travis met Linda at a small diner on the west side of the city, where she worked part-time after leaving the Mercer household. Linda retained her calm manner, neat blouse, hair pinned high, hands wrinkled but steady. When she heard that Elena needed access to the attic files, she only sighed. I knew this day would come. I saw Carlos go up there once, carrying a box of documents, and he never returned to fetch it. I also heard him arguing with Mercer about retaining certain internal reports. They thought I was chopping onions in the kitchen, but my ears are sharper than they knew. Linda reached into her pocket, placing a small ring of keys on the table. These open the side door to the attic. That door only unlocks from inside, and if you want to get in without suspicion, you must go during the technician's break. I still remember the old schedule. That night, rain fell lightly. Travis and Elena slipped into the old research building through the rear entrance where cameras had been removed the previous year. The iron door to the attic groaned as it opened, revealing a narrow wooden staircase winding upward like a passage into a sealed memory. Dampness and the scent of aging paper brushed their faces. In the attic, cardboard boxes lay scattered, dust thick, cobwebs draped from beam to beam. Travis swept his flashlight across the labels. Biological engineering, wastewater management, Vega laboratory. Elena stopped. Her hand trembled as she saw a box without a label, only a small scrap of paper taped to the top, marked in pencil. CV. She opened it. Inside were Carlos's notebooks, printed water analyses, photographs of coral bleaching through each stage, and a sealed, heavy envelope. Travis used a knife to slice the edge open. Inside lay a copy of a death certificate, but it was not Carlos's. It belonged to a technician named Andrew Kim, who had worked under Carlos and was said to have died in a car accident just 3 days after the laboratory explosion. Elena turned it over, seeing a forensic stamp without a signature, a death without proper investigation. Beneath it was a stack of documents stamped Internal Confidential, showing the final reviewer as Vin Reardon. Travis lifted the pages, the beam of light catching rows of data. This was the report Carlos had tried to send out, and it had never left the building. Held here, in this dim attic, like a cry smothered by the ocean wind. Elena sat down, pressing the file against her chest. Her eyes glistened, but her voice did not waver. It is all here. No more speculation. No more theories. Travis nodded. Then it is time to bring everything into the light. But we need someone strong enough to tell this story. Someone who cannot be bought or threatened. Elena looked toward the small attic window where the rain fell quietly. I know who. She pulled from her pocket an old business card, edges worn. Margot Ellison, the investigative journalist who once shook an entire chemical conglomerate with a single article. She was the last person Carlos ever trusted, and now it is my turn. The truth is here, and we will not hide it for another day. Margot Ellison appeared at the doorway of Elena's small rented room on a grey morning, carrying the scent of fresh coffee and a worn leather bag filled with a recorder, notebooks, and a camera whose casing had faded with years of use. She was the kind of woman who needed no introduction, for the sharpness of her gaze and the certainty of her stride told anyone watching that she had come to face the truth without compromise or fear. Elena invited her in and placed before her the files recovered from the attic, the hard drive containing the surveillance footage and the copies of Carlos's final notes. Margot turned each page, her eyes sweeping as swiftly and precisely as a scanner, pausing only to nod faintly when the last missing fragments of a story she had chased for years began falling into place. Do you understand that what you hold has the power to push an entire empire over the edge? Elena met her eyes. I am not here to threaten. I am here to finish. Margot remained silent for several seconds, then closed the folder and spoke with the calm force of a command. We begin from inside. I need to reach the people who once worked for Mercer, those pushed out, those silenced. Do you have a list? Elena nodded. I have spoken with 3. One was reassigned after questioning abnormal pH levels in the discharge system. One was a legal assistant who noticed discrepancies in the experimental logs, and the last was the former conservation manager who sent a request for investigation that was never answered. The campaign began like smoke seeping through the cracks of a structure long believed immovable. Margot sent personal emails to each person, avoiding company names, never mentioning Mercer Industries directly. She asked about responsibility, about justice, about losses no one had dared to name. At first, only 1 responded, then 2, then 5. Elena and Travis helped organize the list, arranged secret calls, and transmitted documents through secure channels. Each testimony was recorded, filmed, faces hidden, voices altered if needed. Margot never pressed, only listened. And with each conversation, another sliver of truth surfaced. An unreported leak, a water sample replaced, a laboratory document edited after hours, and then came a confession. A man who had been ordered to destroy Carlos's research records, he refused, and the next morning his brakes failed on a mountain road. He survived, but left the company without condition. Elena recorded everything. She pinned photographs across the wooden board in her room, linking each with red thread as if reconstructing the scene of a crime buried for years. Travis sat silently beside his laptop, translating audio logs, comparing them with original files. Data layered upon data, testimonies aligned. None of the witnesses knew each other, yet all spoke the same truth. Mercer Industries had not merely discharged waste illegally, they had engineered an entire system to hide it. And when Carlos Vega tried to bring the truth to the surface, they erased every trace, including him. That afternoon, Margot stood by the window of Elena's small rented room, the dying light of day illuminating her weathered but resolute face. She turned to Elena. You have done what most people would not dare. You began this story, and I will help you tell it. But once it is told, there is no turning back. Elena did not blink. I do not need to turn back. I need to go all the way. Outside, the sea wind began to blow stronger, carrying the salty tang and mist from the bay. In that small room, a quiet flame was kindled not to burn, but to illuminate, and once that light was lit, no one could extinguish it. Not Grant Mercer, not an entire system, because this time the whispers were loud enough to become a roar, and the truth, finally, had someone willing to speak for it. Before the first light had fully pierced the coastal fog, Elena and Travis were already at the southern pier, where Margot had arranged a small private boat to take them out to the area once called the Vega Reef. This was the site where Carlos had spent nearly 4 years researching before being removed from the project. After his death, Mercer declared the reef closed, citing a cut in funding and an ecosystem incapable of recovery. But Carlos had written in his notebook that what he had discovered beneath the water was not merely nature's injury, but signs of human interference hastening its decline. Now Elena wanted to see it for herself. The boat left the dock, while the sun remained hidden behind thick clouds. The biting sea wind whipped across their cheeks, but Elena felt nothing but her racing heartbeat, and the image of Carlos in her mind, bowed under the water among a forest of quietly bleaching coral. When the boat stopped in the middle of the bay, the captain pointed to a pale grey-blue stretch of water, unnaturally still. This had once been the heart of the reef. Now, no one dared dive there. No fish, no seaweed, only sand, stone, and what had been left behind. Elena suited up, checked her air tank, and nodded to Travis. He would not dive with her. He stayed on the boat, handling the underwater recorder and signal light. As she descended, the cold water pressed around her like invisible arms, heavy and silent. Light from the surface faded, giving way to the deep blue of the seabed. She followed her electronic compass, torchlight sweeping across rocks coated in silvery white patches, the remnants of once living coral. And then she saw it. A depression on the seabed, between corroded rocks and unnatural cracks. Elena swam closer, fingertips brushing a broken coral branch. It crumbled in her hand like decayed bone. Carefully, she collected a sample into a glass vial, labeling it. Nearby, a piece of rusted metal protruded from the sand, etched with technical markings. She recognized it. It was the biological diffuser Carlos had mentioned, supposedly removed from testing when chemical leakage at high concentrations was detected. But clearly, it had not been removed. It had been left right in the heart of the reef. She continued to swim, the camera mounted on her head capturing every movement. Moments later, her heart clenched as she saw a rock formation shaped in a familiar way. She wiped the mud from the surface, revealing a bronze plaque engraved with Carlos Vega's name and the project's inauguration date. She did not know if she was crying or if it was only the salty water seeping into her mask. But she held the plaque, gripping it as if holding a piece of his soul. When she resurfaced, the wind felt stronger, yet Elena no longer felt cold. She handed the sample and video to Travis, eyes still fixed on the depths she had just left. She whispered, "He was right. It's all there." Travis nodded, his voice low. This reef was killed not by time, but by deliberate silence. Elena looked toward the horizon. And now, we will make its voice heard again, clearly, not silenced, not buried, because no one has the right to turn the sea into a grave for the truth. That afternoon, in the small room where sunlight filtered through dusty windows, Elena opened her old laptop and connected the hard drive containing the videos, images, and copies of documents retrieved from the reef. Travis stood silently behind her, watching every movement. Margot Ellison sat at the corner of the table, notebook in hand, expression unreadable, eyes sharp as knives. She had seen enough in life to know that some truths required no embellishment. What Elena had brought up from the depths of the sea was already the most complete story. No commentary, no musical score could add weight to those images. A reef bleached white, rusted equipment left behind, evidence lying on the seabed, waiting for its day to surface. Elena paused on the final frame, where Carlos's nameplate appeared amidst the silt. "Nothing left to hide," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. Margot nodded. "I will take it public. But first, I want it delivered through the right person." 3 hours later, Elena met Vin Reardon in a small cafe in the old district, where the golden light made everything feel as if unfolding in a quiet dream. He said nothing for the first 5 minutes, simply watching the video with ears accustomed to hundreds of debates over risk and reward. But this time, he had no reason to deliberate. When the nameplate appeared, he stopped the video and leaned back in his chair. Carlos was right. I told Mercer that if this project continued, one day we would pay, and now that day has come. Elena looked him in the eyes. I need you to hand over the second video, the part no one has ever seen. The internal meeting discussing removing Carlos's name from all project records. Vin pulled a small memory card from his pocket and placed it on the table. She knew that once this footage was released, not only would Mercer collapse, but a chain of implicated names would follow. Elena did not blink. I understand, and I still want it made public. Vin said nothing more. He simply stood, slowly leaving the cafe, as if aware that after today, nothing would ever return to the way it had been. That evening, Margot sent her report to the newsroom, attaching the complete dataset along with a single note, unedited, uncut. Let the truth speak for itself. And as she pressed send, the evidence that had been submerged for years began to rise to the surface. Elena watched the screen light up in the dark room. No applause, no celebration, only silence. And then a soft exhale, like a breeze. Like drawing a soul from the depths of the sea to the shore, not to save it, but to allow it its rightful rest. And the truth, at last, was no longer drowned. Margot Ellison's official article was published at 6 a.m. Eastern Time, under a simple yet unmistakable headline, "A Coral Reef Killed, a Man Silenced, an Empire on the Brink." Within an hour, the nation's largest news platforms began sharing the story. Every video clip, every underwater image, every recording of former Mercer employees' testimony was sourced in full. Carlos Vega's name appeared on timelines of millions. In a single morning, his name ceased to be a footnote in old reports. It became the center of a media storm. On television, special bulletins interrupted morning programming to cover the breaking news. Mercer Industries was accused of manipulating biological data, deliberately destroying marine ecosystems for financial gain, and suspected in the deaths of at least 2 internal staff members. Faces, once icons of the biotechnology industry, now appeared tense under questioning headlines. Mercer's stock plunged rapidly in the opening session, forcing the exchange to suspend trading for 15 minutes to control volatility. That evening, Elena watched Grant Mercer appear on television in a brief press conference that lasted only 7 minutes. He wore a dark suit, standing before a backdrop printed with the company logo. A row of assistants and legal advisors lined up behind him. His voice was even void of emotion. The accusations were false. The company was cooperating with authorities. The data used against them had been edited and taken out of context. But he offered no evidence, no specific rebuttal. And he took no questions when he finished speaking. Elena watched the entire broadcast from her small rented room, surrounded by stacks of documents now copied into multiple backups. She did not feel surprised. She did not feel anger. She knew Mercer would counter with denial. That was what he had always done. But this time, the public no longer stood with him. On social platforms, clips from the original videos were shared millions of times. The nameplate of Carlos Vega beneath the Vega Reef became a symbol. Elena's single sentence from a short interview with Margot was quoted everywhere. "No one has the right to turn the sea into a grave for the truth." The public was no longer silent. Former Mercer employees began speaking openly, no longer hiding behind anonymity. A wave of resistance rose not only within marine biology circles, but across academia, environmental groups, and legal communities. By the end of the week, at least 3 federal investigative bodies had opened cases. A group of senators demanded a public hearing before Congress. And in a small room at an old newsroom, Margot Ellison printed the final hard copy of her article and placed it before Elena. "You have done what Carlos always believed could never be done." Elena did not answer. She simply looked at the paper, folded it, and slipped it into her coat pocket like a letter not yet delivered. The tide had arrived, but this time it did not sweep the truth away. It brought the truth back to shore, and Elena had been waiting a long time for it. 3 days after Margot's article shook the morning broadcasts and forced Mercer's board of directors into an emergency meeting, Elena found an anonymous envelope pushed quietly beneath her door. No name, no postmark. Only a short handwritten line in smudged black ink at the upper corner, for the one who still wants the whole truth. She opened it with the caution of someone accustomed to living among masks and half-truths. Inside were 3 printed pages, one of them a copy of the internal contract Carlos had once mentioned, but never shown her. The remaining 2 were classified appendices, never disclosed, and the detail that made Elena's breath stop short was the signature at the bottom of each page. Grant Mercer. Travis skimmed the pages, then dropped into a chair. This is the expansion plan for the Regenesis project, but not for biological restoration as the company claimed. It outlines a system for controlling marine microorganisms to support deep seabed mineral extraction. In short, Mercer had used the guise of conservation to develop a method of controlled environmental degradation, making it possible to siphon resources from the ocean floor without detection from international environmental regulators. Elena turned to the final page, where the funding source was listed. A private investment fund in Panama, registered under a shell corporation with no website, no headquarters, no real personnel. But what chilled her deepest was a small line of fine print at the bottom. If discovered, all legal responsibility shall fall upon the Level 3 research group. The chief executive bears no liability. Carlos had once told her he felt he was being pushed aside to take the fall. Now she understood. She held the papers tightly, eyes drawn to the window where early light seeped in. Every page in her hands felt like a bone in the skeleton of lies Mercer had built over the years. And now she held the heart of that skeleton. Travis stepped closer, voice low. If we release this, everything moves beyond our control. This is no longer just an environmental manipulation case. This is organized crime. Elena met his gaze. And if we do not, then what did Carlos die for? She handed the documents to Margot during a brief meeting at the old cafe where they had first agreed to reveal the truth. Margot skimmed the papers, silent for a long moment. Finally, she placed the folder into her bag, eyes never leaving Elena. I will bring this to someone I trust in Washington. But first, I want to ask you, are you afraid? Elena shook her head. I used to be. Afraid of losing my job, afraid of being erased, afraid no one would believe me. But now, I am not. I have touched the bottom, and there, I have nothing left to lose. Margot nodded. She stood, walking away amidst the clatter of cups and plates, leaving Elena seated with the empty envelope. But inside, she had never felt so full. Not with anger, but with clarity. The tide had swept away the surface, and what had risen was not debris, but foundation. Truth can be buried, but it cannot be denied. Not when someone dares to hold onto a single piece of paper and turn it into a weapon. Just 3 days after the classified documents in the envelope reached the office of a prominent senator known for environmental advocacy, the system Grant Mercer had built over nearly 3 decades began to crack. Analysts in the press called it the erosion of shareholder confidence. But Elena understood it was the sound of an empire, constructed on fear and deliberate silence, fracturing. A leaked internal memo revealed that 3 members of the Mercer Industries board had convened an emergency session and demanded a halt to all operations of the Regenesis project. One of the 3 had once stood beside Mercer at his first press conference. Now, he answered the media with a single statement: I have read the documents, and I can no longer remain silent." At the same time, a former technical employee filed for witness protection with the Department of Justice, attaching a recording of an internal meeting where water sample readings had been deliberately altered before being sent for testing. The recording named 4 executives, including one closest to Mercer. The public began asking questions. If the technicians knew, if mid-level managers knew, could anyone believe that Grant Mercer was unaware? Elena monitored everything from her room, now lined with maps, notes, and photographs, forming an unofficial command center. Travis brought a list of contracts Mercer had signed with foreign companies, most of which had opaque sources of funding. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became that what had surfaced was only the tip of the iceberg. On a Monday morning, a black car pulled up in front of Mercer headquarters downtown. No sirens, no media. But 2 federal agents emerged, carrying search warrants. No one was handcuffed. Yet everyone's eyes understood the machine had begun to move. One of its first gears was about to fall out. As the news spread, Mercer's stock was suspended indefinitely. In the financial markets, this was called a chain reaction. But for Elena, it was simply truth completing its unfinished work. No shouting, no violence, only patience and persistence. Every empire has a breaking point, and this time that breaking point did not come from outside. It came from the hand that had once polished its flaws. That morning, the sky was heavy with grey, as if the very atmosphere knew something was coming to an end. A message from Margot contained only 4 simple words: "He's leaving." Elena did not need to ask more. She slipped on her coat, tucked the final set of files into her bag, and together, with Travis, drove to the international airport, where an inside source had just confirmed that Grant Mercer had booked a private flight to a country with no extradition agreement. Margot had arrived early, standing hidden behind a concrete column near the underground parking lot, her grey hair tousled by the wind, her gaze as sharp as ever. None of them spoke. They simply waited, standing still amid the rush of a normal Friday, unaware that the day would enter the history of an entire industry. At 10:15, a black car pulled up to the VIP area. The door opened. Grant Mercer stepped out, impeccably dressed in a grey suit, face cold and expressionless, the image of calm the media had always portrayed. He carried a small suitcase, no assistants, no bodyguards. But there was something he could not see. 2 federal agents emerged from the opposite walkway. They did not draw guns. They simply held up warrants and stated the name of the person being arrested. Grant Mercer's eyes flickered in surprise, then regained their composure. He tried to speak, but was cut off by the familiar command. He was taken into custody on charges of financial fraud, obstruction of justice, and complicity in the destruction of environmental evidence. Travis gripped Elena's hand as he watched. She did not move. Her eyes fixed on the man who had once pushed her into the pool, who had turned Carlos's death into a footnote meant to be forgotten. Now he stood at the airport, powerless, surrounded by nothing but handcuffs and flashing cameras in the distance. Linda was there too, arriving quietly as she had lived for so many years. She did not cry, only nodded to Elena, as if to say, "Finally, this day has come." A short while later, as Mercer's car disappeared behind the security gate, Margot turned to Elena and spoke softly, just above a whisper. "This is not the end, but it is a turning point." Elena said nothing. She only exhaled, a long, full breath, as if releasing the weight she had carried in her chest for years. All those years, all the dreams stifled, all the pain buried, finally acknowledged through action. She looked up at the sky, where the thick clouds were finally parting, revealing the first patch of light in the day, perhaps only a sliver of brightness, but enough to know that darkness cannot last forever. As they left the airport, no one spoke of the future. No discussion of upcoming trials or hearings. They sat quietly in the car, letting soft music fill the space and the wind drift through the slightly open window. It was a morning when justice was no longer an abstract concept. It was present in handcuffs, in the silence of someone who had feared nothing but the truth. And for Elena, it was a morning when she was no longer merely a survivor. She was a witness to change, a change that could not be reversed. A new current, beginning in the very place where everything had once been submerged, a year after Grant Mercer's arrest at the airport, when public attention had waned and his name no longer appeared in the morning news. A small ceremony was held along the Santa Lorena Bay, once the center of the Regenesis project. There was no stage, no media, only a simple wooden podium set on the sand, a few rows of white chairs near the water, and the sea so still it seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. Elena stood there, holding a small wooden box containing Carlos's ashes, flanked by Travis, Linda, Margot, and the others who had dared to speak, when everyone else stayed silent. No one wore black. They had chosen white, sea blue, or pale beige, the colors of the reefs Carlos had loved. They had not come to mourn. They had come to return. The newly sanctioned Vega Reef Conservation Project had officially resumed under the sponsorship of an independent environmental organization, but it did not begin with contracts or speeches. It began with a promise that what had been destroyed would be rebuilt, not for profit, but for justice and for the memory of someone who had once believed science could be a force for good if it was not twisted by the hands of power. Elena walked slowly to the water's edge. Gentle waves lapped at her feet like a wordless whisper. She opened the box. The ashes inside were light, but the weight in her chest was not. She looked out across the sea, where millions of marine lives had once lain in silent graves, and where she had last seen Carlos alive. Her voice rose, not loud, but enough for the wind to carry it. He once said the ocean does not forget. And now, neither do I. She poured the ashes into the waves. White streaks dissolved into the water like a quiet cloud before vanishing. No trace remained. But for those standing there, the act carried a sacredness greater than any ritual. Travis stepped close, saying nothing, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Linda stood behind, tears falling, yet a smile lingering on her face. For her, the student of years past was now at peace, not because the guilty had been punished, but because those who remained had done what was right. Margot captured the ceremony with an old camera, no long lenses, no staged angles. She said truth needed no edits. Beside her stood several young graduate students selected for the Vega Fellowship program, where Elena now served as a mentor. They were inexperienced, but their eyes shone with the same light Elena had carried 10 years before. The ceremony ended with a moment of silence. No words, no applause, only the sound of the waves. Yet, that was the sound Carlos had loved most. When everyone had departed, Elena lingered, walking along the sand with a seashell in hand. In her mind echoed the question that had haunted her for years. Could things have been different if she had acted sooner? Then she remembered Margot's words, "We do not rewrite the past. We only make the present worthy of what has been lost." And today, for her, that present had arrived. She turned to look at the reef, where marine biologists were placing the first clusters of coral into the water. A small patch of reef had been named Carlos Point, a living marker on the new ecological map. Beneath the surface, life that had once been stripped away was beginning to stir again. Elena drew a deep breath, the salty air filling her lungs. She did not know where she would go next, but she knew one thing. This was not the end. This was the beginning. And this time, she would not go alone. For some things, once returned to their rightful place, are never lost again. Like trust, like memory, and like the ocean, quietly remembering everything. A few months after the ceremony returning Carlos's ashes to the sea, Elena sat alone by the small window of her wooden house on the bay. In front of her lay the first page of her memoir, titled Times Beneath the Waves, asterisk. She had written, erased, and rewritten it countless times, not because she didn't know where to begin, but because each keystroke forced her to relive moments she had thought long asleep. Her journey had not begun with courage, but with pain. Not guided by light, but by questions no one dared to answer. And it was precisely the silences, the wounds, the unnamed losses that pushed an ordinary woman out of the shadows to start her own path. She had once been a grieving wife, a woman thrown into a piranha pool amidst cruel laughter, an anonymous employee cast aside from her husband's research project. Yet in the end, she had stood up, not for revenge, but to protect what should never have been destroyed. Like the reef, like the life beneath the ocean, like the memory of someone she had loved and trusted to the very last moment. What can we learn from this journey? Perhaps that truth never dies, even when buried beneath layers of lies. Perhaps that a person's strength does not lie in power or reputation, but in the courage to never deny what they believe is right. And perhaps the greatest lesson is that no matter how loud the world becomes, the ocean remembers everything. Tides may be blocked, but they will return, quietly and persistently, carrying what seemed lost, like justice, like faith, and like a name carved once more into the depths of the sea. And you, how do you feel after hearing this story? Does Elena's journey make you think of someone in your life, or remind you of something long forgotten? Share your honest thoughts in the comments below. We would love to hear from the deepest part of your heart, because sometimes a story is not just to be heard, but to reflect upon the journey we are walking ourselves. If you enjoy moving stories like this, do not forget to subscribe to Time's Emotional Echoes, asterisk, like the video, and share it to spread positive life lessons every day. This is where we recount real stories, journeys of resilience, losses, and hopes where anyone can find themselves reflected. Thank you for spending your precious time following us to the end of this story. May you have health, peace, a light heart, and days full of meaning. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video on Time's Emotional Echoes, asterisk.